Amigos de Usala Media, estamos aquí de nuevo en Compass. Les habla Fernando Mendez. Este programa is directed by our able engineering staff here at Usala Media. The topic for the day is justice and any other related issues to that. Why am I interested in that is because it is in the news right now. The number of killings, the number of crimes committed not only in our beloved city of brotherly love, but all around this nation in different places. And there are all these issues about whether or not there are adequate laws. And in some places where they have very drastic laws, that's what many of these crimes have been committed. So Florida, California, where they have strict laws for gun possession and purchasing of weapons. And we're still, we find out that that is not an obstacle for some individuals, probably some of them mentally ill, who have access to weapons, and then they go on to commit very serious crimes. How do you apply justice in those cases where there is mental illness? Do you assign responsibility to parents who either made the weapons available, provided the money for the purchase of the weapons? I mean, I remember there was a case where a father had bought some very serious weapons as a birthday gift for an 18-year-old. So all those topics are right now in the headlines, and that's why we're talking about how, in which way this country can find a solution to crime, to the problems we have with prisons, the inequality of justice, the way it is applied to poor people as opposed to very wealthy individuals who can hire very expensive lawyers that will keep them not only out of prison, but it would keep them free of any kind of punishment. So the law is not equally applied, and that's one problem we have. That's evident if we look at the statistics and we look at the number of people who are incarcerated because of drug possession. And a great majority of people in jail for that reason is mostly Black and Latino, and perhaps Asian. But the white population, who are also probably dealing in it and consuming drugs, for the most part, getting away with it. And that is one preoccupation that any government would have. So, what is justice? So I was looking up a definition of justice, and it says the maintenance or administration of what is just, especially by the impartial adjustment of conflicting claims or the assignment of merited rewards or punishments. In the same context, we can say that the punishment should fit the crime. So the punishment for stealing bread from a store should not be in any way the same for somebody beating somebody up. And speaking of that, right now in the headlines, we have another case that it made the headlines for a good reason. Paul Pelosi, the husband of Nancy Pelosi, was attacked in San Francisco by an individual who has since then given interviews to say that he's sorry he didn't do it right, that he wanted to do more, that he wanted to wait until Nancy Pelosi arrived home to sort of dispense his own form of justice. And that's what we're talking about. We cannot decide, each of us, that we're going to apply justice, because then the system will never work. One of the reasons it can work is that we all agree to this compact. There's an agreement that certain laws that we have decided long ago in this country will be applied equally to all of us. And as long as we can find that balance between punishment and reward, how do we decide that? Well, there are justices for that. But here we are, running into another problem, that the justice system, all the way to the Supreme Court, has become sort of poisoned, unequal, because we got politics involved in it. And now we have a Supreme Court that leans too much to the right. So the pendulum has swung from, it was leaning probably too much to the left. Also, not fairly applied justice, if it's any of those extremes, to the left or to the right. It should be find a happy middle where we can all accept that the punishment is fair, that the decisions of a judge or a court, whether it's a state court or a Supreme Court, that those laws are respected, that the punishments are equally applied regardless of party affiliation, regardless of race or sex. But that's another case in which this court created a problem for the Republican Party when they voted against the right of women to have an abortion. And that cost dearly to the Republicans. Not enough to lose Congress, to the House, but enough that they have a very tiny majority that has made Kevin McCarthy sort of a puppet of the extreme right of his party. There are 15 or 20 individuals who have forced his hand on many issues. So what kind of justice are we going to get from a Congress that is right now dedicated to pursuing not what is of benefit to the people? They are dedicated to pursuing their own ends, attacking Biden, attacking the FBI. The FBI was one of the most respected institutions in this nation. And all of a sudden they are going to be called into Congress to render account as to how and why they are prosecuting a former president, what they are doing about some documents that President Biden also had a certain amount of documents in his possession that he should not have. And now we find Pence probably had the same. We don't know about other presidents like Obama, Clinton. Did they have the same situation? But here we are. We're caught in a Congress that is not dedicated to implementing the laws that exist, to improving the lives of people. What they want to do, and they're dedicating all their efforts, is to undo any democratic ideas that they can undo, attack the government, stop the government of Biden to function properly, to stop any laws that they don't agree with, to, in other words, maybe even paralyze the government, because as we speak, the president is meeting with Kevin McCarthy to decide on the debt ceiling. So that's one of the headlines of the day. The other headline concerns more the topic of today, which is the Reverend Al Sharpton, who is himself a sort of a controversial figure. We remember the Tamara Hawley case in New York, where he rose to fame because of that controversy. But since then, he sort of cleaned up his act, and now he is acting all self-righteous about justice and fairness to the black people. And he's become sort of the symbol of the activist, the black activist. And he will be at the funeral of Tyree Nichols, who was killed by a group of policemen who had been appointed, especially appointed, to combat crime. There was no reason for Tyree to be attacked by the police, and to come to this end, to die at the hands of a group of policemen who, by all accounts, should be in charge of protecting him and the other citizens of Memphis. So there we are, one more funeral in a nation that has seen plenty of those. We can remember so many of them, so many of these crimes, from the children, the killing of children that this primary school that made Obama cry and promise that he would do everything possible to improve our laws for gun control. And then, well, we know what happens to those proposals. They come to die in Congress, a Congress that is highly influenced by the National Rifle Association. And because that they dispense a lot of money, and they practically bribe all these Congress people to do their bidding, to pursue not justice, but to pursue ends that would please people who love to carry guns and who use the Constitution, the Second Amendment, in the wrong way. Because I, for one, and I know that many people believe that this is true, the interpretation that everybody should be allowed to carry weapons, to carry an arm, is not constitutionally protected. It was supposed to be for a militia that would help the government control the population. So, but anyway, so because it wasn't at all clear as to its meaning, it has been misapplied, misinterpreted over the 250 years of this country. So that's one thing that has to be remedied, I guess. We'll find out very soon if our government can go in that direction, correcting what has been abused. So we're going to take a brief pause here in Usala Radio, Usala Media. This is Campus, les habla Fernando Mendez. We'll be back in 1 minute. Pagano's Market and Bar has been serving gourmet Italian foods in Center City for 3 generations. Call Matthew Pagano for all your catering needs, and during these difficult times, please mention Fernando Mendez and receive a nice discount along with free delivery. Pagano's also makes the finest gift boxes in the city for all your holiday needs. Visit paganosmarketandbar.com. Amigos de Usala Media, estamos aquí de nuevo en Campas. Les habla Fernando Mendez. Estamos continuando con este monólogo sobre la justicia. ¿Qué es la justicia y por qué no se aplica igualmente en todas partes? Y no se aplica igualmente entre pobres o ricos. No se aplica igualmente si usted es de una raza que no sea la raza blanca. Ya sabemos que esta justicia no se aplica igualmente a todos los ciudadanos. Y ese es un problema que este gobierno, la legislatura, la corte, es un problema que tienen que solucionar. Esta percepción que tenemos de que no hay justicia porque no se aplica equitativamente. Sí, vamos a continuar con ese tema. Estamos hablando en inglés primordialmente porque la lengua es más fácil en ese sentido, usar palabras que para mí personalmente son más familiares en términos de la controversia que se ha creado en este país. So we're talking about whether or not justice is applied equally, and we know it's not. We know that if you have money and you can hire, the best lawyers, sometimes many people who are, we presume there's enough evidence to find them guilty of crimes. We know that in the long run they become free because whatever small particle of the law helps them get free. We know, for instance, one very famous case, O.J. Simpson, and that he himself wrote a book, If I Did It, which pretty much confirmed that he had committed the crime. He had killed his wife and the man who was with her that day. So that justice was not applied fairly because he had hired a team of lawyers, some of which were extremely famous. Kardashian, whose family has become famous for other reasons, but he was one of the lawyers in that, and as well as the other team, all of them very famous lawyers, which saved him. And he had the money, he had the means to pay for them. Well, that's not the case with the average citizen, who may be guilty or not of a crime, but he cannot provide the same kind of defense for himself, lacking the funds, lacking the money. But there are other problems with the administration of justice in this country. And now police are forced to carry these cameras that supposedly will record every action that they undertake. And so there is some evidence as to whether or not they acted fairly or they acted unfairly in any case. Well, in the case of Tyree, we already know that there's evidence that contradicts their testimony even. There's video that contradicts their story. And so there were any number of policemen at this encounter with Tyree that now we see that where they were attacking and beating him up when he was not resistant. He was still able to communicate with them, respond to them orally, but they didn't want to hear it. So they were determined to attack him and to hurt him. And the final outcome is that he died at the hands of the policemen. And we will see what kind of punishment they get. That's the one thing that we will follow up on that. Find out how these people responsible for a crime that was it made the national news, the international news. Another case, I mean, it's not the only case where we have seen an unjust act committed by the police, the people in charge of safeguarding the population. So, justice is blind, and perhaps in the case of Tyree and other minorities that have been attacked by the police, justice needs to remove the blindfold and take a serious look at how we are administering justice. How are we training our policemen? This was a special group that had been trained. The people that committed the crime against Tyree Nichols were people who were highly trained and a very specific group that now has been disbanded. But there we are. We'll find out why and how they committed this crime and what motivated them and how will they be punished. An eye for an eye, remember that? It's a biblical admonition. You commit a crime, there'll be an eye for an eye. In countries like in Singapore, draconian measures, just for littering, you could be whipped, you could be punished very seriously just for throwing trash in the street. Imagine that. Imagine how many people will be punished in this country. Speaking of that, I mean, it's one of the things that is very annoying is to see one of our beautiful streets recently cleaned, paved, and so on, and all of a sudden there's thousands of spots because there's chewing gum all over the sidewalk, because there's graffiti on the walls. And we should be more careful with the environment in which we live. There's one thing I don't understand. It has nothing to do with poverty. It has to do with who we are and how we are raised. There's no justification for poor people to destroy their own neighborhoods with graffiti, with dirt, with trash, with abandoned cars. That attracts crime. And then there is the drug problem that it's another topic for another day. But also that contributes to the decay of our neighborhoods. And we know that, especially in the case of Philadelphia, there is a neighborhood that has been unjustly abandoned by our government. It's like they don't have a solution for it, so there it is. They said, it's an isolated area of the city, except we all pay the price for that. Where there is that kind of commotion in a neighborhood, that it creates instability, insecurity for the population, that has repercussions for the whole city. It has repercussions certainly in the justice system, in the administration of justice. So we can only point to the problems, illustrate the problems, name them. The solutions are in the hands of people who know how to find solutions for those problems. People who are in charge of government, people who are trained to do that. So why did it happen that this city abandoned an area of the city that could be clean, livable? There are people living there. There are kids walking in unsafe streets walking to school in unsafe areas every day. So that, in a way, is a lack of justice, a lack of providing the right environment for these people just because of their poverty. The city has abandoned them. And then the solutions that come do not help them, because what we have is gentrification that benefits a few people, a few developers, a few people who can afford the new houses, who can open new businesses. But then they forced the poorest of the poor to move into ever worsening areas. So that's another lack of justice. And the government is in charge of that. Our government is in charge of administering justice. So the police that killed Terry Nichols, there's video that contradicts their testimony. The Reverend Sharpton has been on many of these funerals, and he will probably make a speech to that congregation. He was on MSNBC talking about what he was. Speaking of justice, he was in the motel where Martin Luther King was killed, when he came to the balcony and Lee Harvey Oswald shot him dead. It's all about a man who had just made a speech by the mountaintop, about reaching the mountaintop, about reaching the promised land. And he predicted his own death. He said, I will never see the promised land. That must have been some premonition he had. But he was a man seeking justice for his people, marching in the streets where he was threatened and beaten, along with many other black leaders. What kind of justice they got? Remember the beatings they suffered. And he paid the ultimate price just because he was fighting for justice for his people. It's a difficult topic to cover because there are people that can interpret the laws in many ways. But if we were applied equally to all, we would not have as many acts of injustice committed. Well, thank you for listening to us here on Usala Media. Se despide Fernando Mendez y se despide también Dani Ramos and Dylan de Rosato. Muchas gracias. Hasta la próxima.